Everyone, I'm going to be discussing the case Weinberger versus Wiesenfeld. This was one of my favorite cases from this semester, and I think it was a very important case that helped in defeating some of the gender stereotypes of the 1970s, but also today. And it was a huge case for Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and she was a very big part of this case going to the Supreme Court. So first I'm going to discuss some of the facts of the case and give a little bit of a background. And then I'm going to go into my overall opinion of the case and the Supreme Court's decision, and ultimately why I thought this case was as important as it really was. So a man named Stephen Wiesenfeld married a woman named Paula in 1970. Paula was a teacher 5 years prior to getting married to Stephen, and she continued to work as a teacher after they got married. She ended up being the main breadwinner for their family and the main primary source of income because she made way more than Stephen did. 1972, she was giving birth and she tragically died during childbirth. So Stephen was essentially left with a newborn child, and he also lost the primary income that was supporting their family. And as tragic as this was, what was even just as tragic is the fact that Stephen might not be able to stay home and care for their newborn the way that he should be able to. So Stephen decided to do what most people would do, most women especially, if their husband died. He decided to apply for Paula's Social Security benefits so that he could stay at home and he could give their child the proper care that it needed. He ultimately was denied based on the fact that he was a man. There was no other reason, no other clear-cut or reasonable reason for his getting denied other than he was a widower applying for his wife's benefits because she was the primary source of income. And of course, I think the reason he was denied more than anything was that the court was not used to a man applying for his wife's benefits because that was not typical back then. Typically, the men would be the breadwinners and the women would, if something happened to the husband, the woman would be the one who would try to apply for his Social Security benefits. So this was sort of a different situation to them. It was not very common in the 70s for a woman to be making significantly more than her husband, and I just don't think the courts knew how to handle that. So Stephen made the right decision, and he ultimately took the case to the Supreme Court, and with the help of RBG, the case was passed unanimously. So what ended up happening is the Supreme Court sided with Wiesenfeld. They said that the purpose of Social Security benefits are to help the surviving spouse and the children, and the whole point of Social Security benefits is to allow the surviving parent to properly care for the child. So they ultimately said, this was Justice William J. Brennan Jr., he ultimately said that regardless of the gender of the parent, everyone deserves Social Security benefits in order to take care of their child. And by not allowing Stephen to get those benefits, they were being counterproductive, and it was just clearly a case of gender discrimination. I think the Supreme Court made the right decision, and I think it's easy to look at this case and say, this is a men's rights case, but really, it's just as much a men's rights case as it is a woman's, because the whole reason that Stephen got denied those benefits is because he was a man applying for his wife's benefits when typically the roles would be reversed. And I don't think that this was normal back then, and I don't think that the initial court knew how to handle it. And I also think it wasn't an accepted mindset to think that a woman could be the breadwinner of her family. So ultimately, I just don't think that the courts knew how to handle this case initially, and I definitely think it was a gender-based discrimination due to the views of the times and how sort of revolutionary and progressive Stephen was by demanding for his wife's benefits because he was completely entitled to them. So I think this case was a complete landmark case back then, but I do think it's still a women's rights case because Ruth Bader Ginsburg was, her whole ideology was that whatever a man has the right to, a woman should have the right to, and vice versa. So the only way that gender discrimination could be handled, and the only way to get rid of gender discrimination altogether, was to make the two sexes completely equal. And it's easy to say, you know, a woman should be able to do everything a man should do, but it's completely counterproductive if you don't also think that a man should be able to do everything a woman should do. So I think that's a big part of why RBG got so involved with this case, because she felt that this case needed to be listened to by the Supreme Court, and it would not only help Stephen and men trying to receive benefits, but it would also kind of get rid of this whole stereotype that a woman could not possibly be the breadwinner of her family.